This is the OMG Book Show with William O'Day, episode number 17.
Welcome to the OMG Book Show, where it's all about taking you into the brains of fantastic authors. No scalpels required. It's more than an interview, it's an experience. And now, your host, William O'Day.
Ladies and gentlemen, bringing an interview to you from the internet today, William O'Day in the blue corner and Chuck Grossart in the red corner. Ooh, I don't even know where that came from, but it was fun to do. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Anyway, thanks for joining me today. Today we have a wonderful interview with Chuck Grossart, as mentioned in the wacky introduction. And despite what the wacky introduction may have misled you to believe, Chuck and I are not in any kind of a fight. It is actually more of a dance. Just how interviews are. Like, you're going around the dance floor, you're having fun, and okay, Chuck, if you feel uncomfortable about the idea of us dancing around the dance floor together, then let's not call it a dance floor. Wrong metaphor. How about we are two oarsmen in a canoe, kayak? We're racing, like for Harvard. We're racing against our mortal enemies, those pesky Yalesmen and women. I don't really know. Yaleys? I think they are actually called Yaleys. I have a good friend down in Los Angeles who graduated from Yale, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I feel like he has said the word Yaleys before, but I don't actually know if it was a derogatory term or if that's what he comfortably called himself. So anyway, like I said, there's a lot of digressions that are going to occur on this show from time to time, but now we're going to get back to it. In this interview with Chuck, it's a lot of fun. We talk about his history before he became a writer. And he had, and this is probably top 1%. No, I would say top 10th of 1% of most unique jobs in the entire world. He was a missileer. And if you didn't know what a missileer was, which I didn't really know either before talking to him and looking into it, that is the folks who work for the military, and in his case, the Air Force. Maybe they all do. I'm not sure about that, but he did. And they go 50, 60 feet underground in like a concrete capsule. It's actually shaped like a capsule. He tells us about that in the interview, and we get a lot more details, but it's the folks that have their hands on the keys and give the yes or no, waiting for hopefully never to come signal to launch ICBM missiles, intercontinental ballistic missiles. So that is a amazing, crazy, unique job that you don't hear about every day. So Chuck tells us a bit about that. I found it very interesting. He also tells us about his first novel he started way, way, way back in the day. I think he said around 2001, as he was stationed somewhere in the remote hinterland of Alaska. He said he had to be away from his family for a year. I'm sure that was very, very hard for all of them. And I'm glad that he is back with them now. But the good part of being stationed, apparently, out in the hinterlands of Alaska for a year is that you don't have a lot to do. And so he started writing his first novel. So he tells us about how that all came together. He also talks about how writing flash fiction has helped him become a better author, a better writer. And then he also describes to us the worst job he ever had. And it's almost like a trick question because it's not the answer that you're going to expect. And I don't think it's not an answer that I had gotten from any other interview yet, but it actually makes total sense when you think about it. Chuck also talks about how his writing process and content has changed over time, and also how having two daughters has affected his writing as well. And I commiserate completely. It has affected and guides in some ways my writing as well. So we find out about all of that and so much more. So you know what comes next, right? Surgical gloves on, metaphorical scalpel in hand. Let's get started. Thank you, Chuck, for joining us.
Hey, thanks, Will. I appreciate you having me on.
Happy to do it. Thanks for taking the time, as I mentioned. I wanted to, I was just doing a little bit of reading about you and what you had done in the past before books. And at some point I ran, I think it was on your website I looked at, and I saw a section of photos, and it's kind of like snapshot timeline of your life.
Uh-huh.
And one, that was super cool just to kind of click through them and kind of see like, oh, this is your background and kind of who you are. Just a little picture, a little peep. But one thing that I saw, which was just made me laugh out loud, was you have a picture of you, I think, while you were in the United States Air Force. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm retired lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for your service, first of all.
Well, thank you.
And then that picture, so you're standing next to a jet. I think you had labeled it as an F-111, and you've got a huge smile. I mean, you look really happy. I don't know if you're faking it or not, but in the caption, it says you just barfed in it.
Oh, I did. That was a lot of fun. That was when you're in ROTC between your junior and senior year in college. They used to do this anyway. They'd send you to an Air Force base, and you would have a chance to, mess around with a flying squadron or whatnot. And they sent me to Mountain Home Air Force Base in Idaho, where the 366th attack fighter wing was, the gunfighters, and they flew F-111As. And at the end of my 2 weeks up there, I got a chance to fly in one. And it was amazing. It was a 3-ship formation. We took off and went and flew out to a bombing range and did a bunch of stuff. But what made me sick was I had the helmets that you wear are actually poured to fit a person's head, right? So I had someone else's helmet on, and this guy had 2 divots in the top of his head.
Oh, wow.
So I had 2 bumps poking into the top of my head the whole time. So it gave me a huge headache. And once we got back in the pattern, I grabbed my little barf bag and there it went. But it was so much fun. So yeah, I was sick, but they snapped the picture, and I was pretty happy.
Right, I imagine so. And are the F-111s, are those 2 flyer configurations, or was it just you?
It was a pilot and a weapon system officer that sit side by side in the 111. They're all the ones that we had are all retired now. And I don't think the Australians fly them anymore either. But yeah, they're all gone out of the Air Force. But boy, what an amazing airplane to get a chance to ride in. It was a lot of fun, even though I threw up.
Well, I mean, yeah, I imagine it's like the amusement park ride times 100 or so. So you get the thrill. You may feel sick, but it's amazing all the same.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm one of those people that wanted to fly so bad, but my body didn't cooperate. That inner ear of mine was like, no, you're much better standing on the ground. So that's what I ended up doing for my Air Force career, mostly on the ground or underground, one of those two.
It isn't something that you can kind of train your body out of, like with more exposure to G's or whatever?
Oh, some people can. They, they'll go up and in training and they'll barf every time, and eventually they'll get over it. But for me, I'm just not made to fly. That's all.
Well, that's good to know, what your path should and shouldn't be. It reminds me of just in a, I guess, remotely tangentially related story. I learned how to fly single engine land airplanes way back when. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. Nothing like F-111s, just little Tomahawks and things. But we went out in Oklahoma over a particularly hot summer day. So there were these, pretty big updrafts, and just kind of spend about an hour and a half just bouncing up and down. It was not even a roller coaster, more just like I think they have those vertical like cliffhangers, like zoom 200 feet down and then climbing back up. And just by the end of it, I was just the same, just pale, and it was horrible. I mean, I had fun, but I still went home, just collapsed on my bed, and was just like, and my wife now was a girlfriend then, I was just kind of whispered out of the side of my face there. I was like, just leave me alone. I just needed a while. And then she kindly, or I don't think she actually liked me flying, so maybe this is why she did it. She grabbed the edge of the bed. I think it was a futon, so you could kind of move it around. And she bounced it up and down about 20 times.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. And I was like, I'm going to barf here. Leave me alone. And then she had a big laugh and left.
Oh, that's funny.
So from that story, you probably don't understand why we ended up together, but we're great.
Oh, no, that's funny.
All right.
Do you still fly?
I have not. It's important to maintain currency, and I have not personally piloted in many years. I don't even know, like 7, 8, 9, 10 even. It's been a while.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that's some of, like you hear these civilian planes go down occasionally. Of course, some things are just unavoidable. Accidents happen. But I think there's probably a good portion of that is people who are just maintaining currency at the bare minimum and then go out and something unexpected happens. And, you just don't have the practice to react appropriately. That's my guess anyway.
Yeah. It's kind of like riding a bike, but then it's not quite as safe as riding a bike.
Yeah, when you have the potential anyway of falling down a lot from a much bigger distance than a bike.
That's right.
So you mentioned that that was part of your Air Force career, and then I had read somewhere, and I think you kind of alluded to it there just a little bit, that you had spent some time as I think you had called it on your website, a missileer. Is that right?
Right. That's what I started out as. A Minuteman III ICBM launch officer. So I spent my first 4 years pulling alerts out in Wyoming and Nebraska and northeastern Colorado.
And when you say pulling alerts, what does that mean?
Well, the Minuteman III is do you know what a Minuteman III
is? And just for everybody out there, we're talking about a interballistic nuclear missile, correct?
Yeah, intercontinental ballistic missile, right.
Okay.
And going on alert, there were 24-hour alert shifts. So we would leave from the base, myself and another crew member would drive from the base, go out to whatever site we were assigned to, and then take a elevator ride anywhere from, 60 to 70 feet underground to a hardened capsule. And we'd go in there and relieve the other crew, and then we're on alert for 24 hours. And then the next day, another crew would come out and relieve us. And we did that about 8 times a month was the usual crew rotation. But yeah, I did that for about 4 years. My first 4 years of my Air Force career, I spent doing that kind of stuff.
Wow, that's quite a transition or juxtaposition to the high-flying jet F111 day.
Yeah, a little bit different, that's for sure.
So you, the word you used was capsule. Are you actually going down into like something the size of a car and having to like hang out for 24 hours, or can you get up and walk around?
They're not very big. Think of a giant hollow cement Tylenol shaped looking thing. That's your capsule. And on the inside, suspended by 4 big shock isolators was the equipment. And it's basically a long platform that has all the computer equipment on it and a couple of chairs and a bed. And that would actually swing inside the big cement Tylenol. So if there was a detonation close by and the thing would shake like crazy, we just kind of sway back and forth. It's basically how it worked. And behind a couple of gigantic blast doors to get down there. It's a very unique job. And the missileers are out there every single day, 365 days a year, and they're still doing it.
Wow. Well, thank you for doing your job well, because clearly, not just you doing your job well, but world events conspired that we haven't had such a disaster occur yet.
Yep, I agree.
Is it, we won't linger on this too much, but I find it fascinating. I'm guessing others out there might as well. Is there that level of weight riding on your shoulders, or do you just feel like I'm just here to do a job and I'll do it if I have to?
No, there's, excuse me, there's definitely a weight to it. When you first go out on alert and you realize that you have, those missiles out there that you're in control of, for the first few alerts, it's like, oh my God, you're thinking this is a whole lot of responsibility, and it's a little bit frightening. But yeah, we were there to do a job, and part of deterrence is the willingness to be able to do something like that. So yeah, we would, if we got a valid and authentic order from the president, then we would turn keys and we would do our job.
Right.
So yeah, there's a lot of stress that comes with that, and a lot of weight that comes with that. But guys have been doing it for years and years and years and years, and it's kept the peace, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, I think I agree. It's one of, numerous factors, but certainly nobody wants to have that coming in the direction of them. So they're going to, mediate their responses.
Right.
Did you know where the missiles that you were coordinating with, like, did you happen to know the direction or where their targets were? Or they're just like, you're going to launch them and they'll go where they need to go?
Generally, yes, but specifically, no. We didn't know the actual targeting.
And then, is it like all of the cheesy, 1960s sci-fi movies or whatever, and there is an actual button that you, like a red button you push?
Oh, no. It's a set of keys where two people have to do certain actions at the same time, and they're separated far enough that not one person can do it by themselves. They'd need another person to do it with them. So it's really not a whole lot like what you see in the movies. That's good,
because it always seemed like that just seemed like a foolhardy. I mean, what if someone like nods off and their head slips from their hand, and then bonk, you hit the red and
right.
End of the world because you had a bad night's sleep the night before.
Right, that'd be pretty bad.
Right on. Okay, good. Well, it's good to know that reasonable people are reasonably in charge. So that's nice. All right. Well, I wanted to, and we're kind of touching on this as in your history and kind of where you were before you began your writing career. But where was it that you actually started, in the written form storytelling?
Well, I always wanted to write, but I never really found the time to do it until I was a major, and I was stationed up in Alaska on a remote assignment. And what that means is you're away from your family for a year. And I was at a place about 75 miles south of Fairbanks, Alaska, about dead center in the middle of the state. So it was out in the middle of nowhere. And so I had a lot of time on my hands, right? So I had just finished reading this really bad horror novel. And I don't even think I finished it, but I thought, you know what? This guy got published, so I've got to be able to get published. So that night, I started writing my very first novel.
And so was that? I mean, I agree. I thought Stephen King's The Shining was terrible. Is that the book you're talking about?
No, that wasn't it. That's actually one of my favorites.
No, I'm kidding. I love that book. All right. Sorry, go ahead.
So it was then that I started writing, and it took a couple of years to finish that first novel. And then I thought, okay, this is great. I'm gonna send it out. I got a list of agents to send it to and publishers to send it to. And I thought, man, this is going to go out and they're going to love it. In a couple of weeks, I'm going to be a published author. It's going to be great. Of course, it didn't happen that way.
Right.
It took probably, let's see, that particular book probably got about 100 rejections before I finally, decided, well, maybe I should try self-publishing. So about, let's see, what year was it? Probably 2012. So from 2001 until 2012. And 2012 was when I finally self-published it.
And was that The Coming? I think I had read somewhere.
Yep, that was the very first one I started writing. Yeah, and then it has since turned into, you won't find that one out anymore, but it turned into, after being rewritten almost completely, a book I have out there now called The Widening Gyre. So that's actually the rewrite of that very first novel, and it's about 800 times better.
Yeah,
than that first book I put out.
Absolutely. I think I made the mistake on my first, at least large novel in this genre. I had written a couple of little novellas before, but The Darwin Protocol wrote that, and I probably should have done what it sounds like you did, is pull it down and then rework it and put it up sometime later. What I did was, what you can do, and now this indie atmosphere is, just over time, probably like over 2 years, just kept twiddling and fixing, and as I'm working on other stuff too. So I apologize to those people who read it in the first year or so. It's a lot better now.
Yeah, that's the way I feel about that one too. When I first got it done, I thought it was amazing. Wow, I wrote this novel and it's like 700 pages long, and it's great. But there's so much you don't know. I mean, a lot of first time authors, I'm sure, are like that. You think what you put down on paper that first time is great, but
right.
it really isn't. I mean, it probably needs to get cut like crazy. It needs to get reworded like crazy. and there's a lot of stuff that you learn. And when my first traditionally published novel came out, The Gemini Effect, the work to get that novel ready, boy, did I learn a ton of stuff. And I think my writing is completely different than that bored major back in 2001 that decided he was going to write a book. And it's much better now, I think.
I'm amazed that your that first book you said it turned out to be 700 pages. That's huge.
Oh, it was ridiculous. Yeah, it was way too long. You know, no publisher or no agent is going to take on a book for a first book that's that big.
Right,
you know,
right. And
to start with.
Yeah, you kind of need to be Brandon Sanderson in the fantasy world with his sort of success. And then they're like, 700 pages sounds good to me, Mr. Sanderson.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I've learned a lot over the years, and right now I'm having a whole lot of fun with it.
So the Coming started at around 700 pages, and you said over time you reworked it heavily. How many pages approximately did it turn out to be in The Widening Gyre?
Word count probably about 82,000, which is a pretty reasonable length. That's usually where most of my books are, right around 80,000 words as a target.
Yeah, then you did some absolutely massive chopping on that book then.
Oh, yeah. I finally got tired of messing with it and got to about the first quarter of the book and then just deleted the rest of it. And then just started over, basically. Yeah. So it's the storyline's completely different. The ending's completely different. The character's completely different. I mean, it's a completely transformed book. And its form right now as The Widening Gyre is, I think it's about, of course I wrote it, so I'm a little, I'm going to say this, but I think it's just so much better than the original book was.
Oh, I'm sure it is. I mean, it's almost like if you take something that's 700 pages and then compress it to that degree, I guess there's the danger of maybe skipping along the surface too much, but you're definitely going to tighten it up massively, like improve the pacing and descriptions, things like that.
Yep. And that's all the stuff that I didn't understand when I first started writing. And then, as time went on, that's the kind of stuff I learned. It's important to number one, grab a reader right off the bat, however you can, and make that reader want to keep turning pages.
Right. And that's that you definitely hooked me in The Gemini Effect, and we'll talk a little bit more about that probably a little bit later. But yeah, just the way you opened that and kind of the description in the salvage yard and what was happening, kind of the flavor not the flavor is not the right word, but just the feeling in the world during the Cold War at that time. And one thing what was it? Let me see if I have written it down here. Oh, you had said the fear was real. It felt very real. Everybody was just waiting for it to happen. There wasn't a kind of a feeling that it was an if, or maybe not. It was just a when. Yep.
And I think a lot of people that grew up during the Cold War would feel the exact same way. That's the way I felt. I mean, the two biggest bullies on the block, you're just waiting for, one of them to flinch. And it would start. I mean, it was really that way. It was you were just waiting and hoping it wouldn't happen, but chances were that it was going to, but thank God it never did.
Yeah, absolutely. It struck me that it's in support of what you're saying. I had an interview with Bobby Adair, and I believe he's in a similar age range as yourself, and he had mentioned the same kind of feeling growing up, and he was talking about it in terms of how he thinks it probably shaped his desire writing in post-apocalyptic. Is he just said growing up, he just always knew there was going to be a nuclear holocaust. There no question that there wasn't. It was just a matter of when. And so every day was kind of like this burdensome sort of darkness over, like, is it today? Is it tomorrow?
Yeah. Yeah. That's, I think the way I put it, it was under the skin, kind of always there. You're aware of it all the time. You ignored it as much as you could, but it was always there, kind of an itch that you couldn't get rid of.
Did that for Bobby? He mentioned saying when the Berlin Wall fell, he said he felt kind of that what you're talking about, kind of in your skin and in your psyche, always there. He said on that day, that psychological weight for him at least lifted. Did it ever lift for you?
Well, it was very strange during that time when the wall fell, and I think the moment that got me the most was, and I was on alert when this happened. As a matter of fact, was when the the hammer and sickle came down over the Kremlin, and they raised the tricolor Russian flag.
Right.
That was a weird feeling because, growing up my whole life, it had always been, the Soviet Union was always there, and there was no reason to believe they wouldn't always be there.
Right.
And then you see that hammer and sickle flag getting lowered over the Kremlin, and it was just an amazing feeling and kind of weird.
Yeah. I imagine. So I was very young, or reasonably young at the time, but I definitely remember kind of like the ambiguous, I would say, at that age feeling, but like the world has changed.
Exactly. Yeah. It was a big change. That's for sure.
Right on. Well, I wanted to ask you about one thing I had seen about the Gemini effect was that you had originally titled it the Mengele effect, which I'm assuming is, well, not assuming, having read it a little bit into it, the Joseph Mengele experiments and things that happened during World War II. What got you kind of motivated to change it and kind of approach it differently there?
Well, that's one of the difference between self-publishing and working with a publisher. I titled it The Mengele Effect, and with that title, that book won the 2014 Amazon Breakthrough Novel Award for sci-fi, fantasy, and horror. And while we were going through the process to rewrite portions of it, the publisher had stated that they kind of think they wanted to change the title to something different than Mengele. Number one, they said people probably won't be able to pronounce it. And number two, they said it has a Nazi connotation that may put some people off. And that kind of amazed me a little bit. But from a publisher's perspective, they want to try to bring a book out that will appeal to a whole bunch of people, and they didn't want to marginalize any of the potential audience with the title. Right. So that's why it changed from Mengele, which made perfect sense to me. And you've read the book, and you may agree with me, to something different like Gemini, which we worked into the story before it was finalized.
Right. Yeah. And it is so true that, the more kind of experience you get doing this, you do realize like how important, a title is. Like I look at, like A.G. Riddle's, the Atlantis trilogy, and just, Atlantis being in there, it's kind of like, it's a concept everybody's somewhat familiar with. There's like a certain sort of mystery and magical aspect to it, lost ruins under the sea, and kind of, it conjures up, a whole sort of feeling even before you have opened the first page.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. Yeah, titles are a big deal. My last book that came out from 47 North was titled The Argus Deceit, and no kidding, that was like the 80th title that we had gone back and forth with.
Oh no!
Yeah, 80. That was the last one, and it fits the book perfect. It just took a while to get there.
Did you? Who finally came up with the final title?
It was collaborative, and we bounced ideas back and forth for a couple of weeks, and then we got this one and decided to go with it. So it was a collaborative effort between me and the publisher, 47 North.
Right on. Yeah, I originally titled the Darwin Protocol the Malthus Protocol, which most people would have no idea who it is. I think his name was Robert Malthus, and he first kind of postulated about overpopulation and the effects that could have on the world. And same kind of thing in retrospect, as with the Mengele effect, is you kind of just like, no, not so many. I mean, mine was even worse. I think Mengele, I think, is even better because it brings a certain darkness and understanding to a story. Mine was just like, people would think, who's Malthus? I don't care who it is. I have no idea who it is.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah. They spend a lot of time figuring out a title just to make sure it's good. That's for sure. Right. It can be a little frustrating, but I think in the end, like with the Argus Deceit, I think it came out just fine. Yeah, it took a while, but it came out just fine.
That's got a good ring to it. So you, after you had finished The Coming and its monumental 700 pages, and it's like you had mentioned a couple times, like as that first book is finished, you've learned so much to that point, and it's just a huge achievement and feeling of achievement. But then at the same time, it's really just number one. So how did you then turn around and be like, okay, put that aside. Now it's time for number 2.
Well, I had a lot of fun writing that one, and I had a million different ideas bouncing around in my head, and I decided, okay, I'm just going to start on another one. So I started The Mengele Effect, and it was written between 2003 and 2005. So the Gemini Effect that you're reading was actually written, way back then, in its original form. Okay. So you can probably tell by the some of the tone of the book. It was written right after 9/11. I've had some reviewers say, "Oh, it was much too gung ho, go USA." Well, that's because it was written when it was in 2003 to 2005.
Yeah, and there's I don't think I've really felt that yet, but I'm about a quarter in or so. But it's on the one hand, you want to kind of keep your head at times like that, but on the other hand, it is understandable. When your country is attacked, there's going to be feelings of wanting to make that right.
Mm-hmm. Those of us that were in uniform right after that, we were always waiting for those first few months, just waiting for the other shoe to drop. There was the attack in New York and against the Pentagon, and we were just waiting for what was going to come next.
Right.
And I thought to myself, well, what if the other shoe did drop? What would the country be like? What would people be like? And that's part of the Gemini Effect storyline as well.
Well, you've been writing for quite a few years now, so at least since 2003, if not before that with The Coming. If you could go back to your younger writing self, that man in Alaska jumping into it, would you have any advice for him?
Yes, I think I would. I think I would tell him, be prepared to fail. I mean, that was the biggest thing for me, is when I started getting rejections coming in, I was dumbfounded. I'm like, no, there's no way nobody, cannot see how good a story this is. Well, it was a rotten story. I mean, when I first had it written, it really was. Also learn how to, if you are writing, don't be so tied to your words that you can't slice them away. I mean, it's real hard to learn how to edit your own stuff to start with. And one thing that really helped me was I discovered flash fiction. And those are short little stories, anywhere from 300 words to 1,000 words. And you have to get a complete story in that window.
Right.
A beginning, middle, and an end. And I read one flash fiction horror story I ran across somewhere, and I loved it. And I'm like, you know what? I think I can do that. So I sat down and I wrote my first one, and it was called Ripple. And it was about this creepy little kid that had mental powers that he couldn't control when he got mad. And so kept it within that 1,000-word window. And I tell you, you really learn economy of words, and you really learn how to get an idea across in 3 or 4 words rather than 3 or 4 sentences.
Right.
And writing flash fiction really helped me learn how to not stick a whole bunch of extraneous stuff in a story that doesn't need to be there, which helps your pace, keeps the reader interested, and whatnot. So I wrote a whole bunch of flash fiction stories, and ended up self-publishing those. And they're actually in a book I have out there called Scattered Bones, and it's a collection of 20 different short stories, some longer ones, but most of them are flash fiction. They take 3 or 4 minutes to read. But it's a challenge to try to get a beginning, a middle, and an end, a complete story in just 1,000 words. And I really can't do it less than 1,000. That's about as short as I can make one. But it's a lot of fun. I learned a lot doing that too.
Yeah, I don't know if I've gone quite as low as 1,000, but I too enjoy writing short stories just for that element of, one, it's kind of a quicker feedback on the story, and 2, that forced economy it's a new angle, and it's a good angle to practice.
I love writing short stories. They're a whole lot of fun, and novellas are fun too. As a matter of fact, they're a whole lot easier. And you usually write a novella from the first person point of view, which is a little different as well. They're just a lot of fun. The shorter the story gets, I think the more enjoyable it is to write, tell you the truth. Yeah, it is for me anyway.
Is it just because you're going to be done with it soon?
That's part of it.
Because I do find, with the novels, you're there isn't that, or at least you have to manufacture it, for me at least. Like when you sit down and you knock out 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, whatever words for the day, it's still just a small piece in the much larger puzzle. And you're like, did I really do anything today?
Right. I know. That's another thing that I've learned is if you're going to sit down and write a novel. Now for me, when I started, my kids were still pretty young and we had a lot of stuff going on at home. So the only time I found to write was usually late at night when everybody'd gone to bed.
Right.
So, I'm up till 1 o'clock in the morning and then I'm tired all the time. So I wrote whenever I could and it took forever to get them written. Now all my kids are grown. They're all adults. And so I have, all the time in the world other than when I'm at work, when I'm at home, I can write. And I learned that it really just setting a daily goal, and it doesn't have to be that big. For me, a reasonable amount of words for me is about 600, which isn't a whole lot. Usually when I sit down, I'll write more than that. But 600 is easy. And and it adds up in a hurry. If you plan it out, it can take maybe, I don't know, between 4 and 5 months to write a 80,000 word novel if you keep to that 600 word a day limit. So, sit down, pump out 600 words, bang, you're done. Or pump out, like you said, 1,000, 5,000, whatever. It's just taking a little bite of that elephant every day. And then before you know it, you're finished.
Yeah. And that consistency, what you're talking about, is so important because, and still to this day, I'm still figuring out my process. And, like I'll hit a great day, let's say 4,000 words, which for me is a lot. But then, I'll allow all the little bits and bobs of life. And we have two young girls, 8 and 10. So there's always,
oh, you're busy.
Oh yeah. Life is very busy. And, so it's easy for all of a sudden like a day or two to go by. And I'm like, oh man, I've let all this other stuff get in the way of what I really, I don't want to say the only thing I need to be doing, but a big thing that I need to be doing.
Yep. Finding time is one of the big things. You have to find the time to do it. And then once you find the time, then you have to use it and actually sit down and write.
And it goes back to that saying that I think so often, we don't really appreciate, is like, how do you spend your time? Well, it is the ultimate currency. You are spending your life doing something, that's the time.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So it sounds like, have you established kind of a pace for you when you put out novels? Is it like it sounds like a year or so?
Oh, it depends. I mean, things, sometimes I've got a contract and I've got deadlines to meet, and that kind of forces my hand, right? I have to sit down and I have to have a daily goal and I have to meet that deadline to meet, right?
Right.
When I don't have a deadline and I'm writing, then it's kind of happenstance. I'll sit down and write over a weekend or something, or at night, if the spirit moves me, then I'll go ahead and write. So without a deadline, it's kind of hard to make myself butt and seat and start writing. So if I have a contract and I have a deadline staring me in the face, then that makes it a whole lot easier.
Right. Yeah. The external deadline factor can be very helpful.
Yeah, it sure can.
Well, what is, it sounds like you said you have a day job of some kind at this point. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. When I retired from the Air Force, in February of 2009. And right now I'm still working for the Air Force, but as a civilian.
Okay. Yeah. So, you still are able to find time. Do you try to hit that 600 word count pretty much every day?
No. Like I said, if I have a contract or something, which I don't right now, if I have a book under contract that needs to get finished, then it's easy. And
it kicks in.
It's like a second job. You come home from work and then you start your other job and you sit down and you start writing. And I think that's one way you have to look at it. It is work. It is a business, and it's an enjoyable business. it is work, and you have to find time for it and do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, becoming a writer, and now you've published quite a few novels, and having to learn in that process, but like we're talking about, like pacing and character conflict and things of that nature, has it ruined or affected your experience as a reader?
It has affected it, not in a bad way, but I do read differently now. I mean, I will pick up someone else's book, and even though I'm enjoying the heck out of it, I will notice little things that, no, I wouldn't have done that. Oh, nope, I wouldn't have put it that way. You can't help it.
Yeah,
you
totally.
can't help it. You're editing and reading at the same time, especially if you've gone through a copy edit process with a no kidding professional copy editor, and you see all the little mistakes that are there and how to word things differently and stuff like that. And you can't help but do that when you're reading. It doesn't take away the enjoyment for me, but in the back of my mind, there's always that, ooh, I wouldn't have written that sentence that way, or ooh, that's kind of clunky, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, I absolutely love it. It hasn't ruined. I asked that question because I used to, I did visual effects in Hollywood for about 15 years doing big movies. And I started to notice going to movies, I would, especially so many movies these days have, big effects and all kinds of crazy stuff, that I would just start, nitpicking everything until the end of the movie. And I didn't even really enjoy watching it as an experience.
And you can't help it. I mean, if that's what you do for a living, you can't help but do that,
Right. But I have found with the reading, it's, I like what you're saying. I, reading through something, enjoying it, and then you kind of stutter over something and you're like, oh, I probably would have done that differently. But I absolutely love those books when you're just flowing right along with it. That's such a wonderful experience.
Yeah, I agree. I think being a writer and you read someone else's work and you can learn from it too. The way, I like the way this guy has this paced out, or I like the way he put that twist right there. This is awesome. There's a lot of things like that you good and bad, that you look for in every book that you read once you're a writer yourself. Yeah,
so true. And it reminds me, I had just finished Marcus Sakey's Brilliance trilogy about a couple months ago or so, and enjoyed, it's a great trilogy overall. But one thing that funnily or hilariously stuck with me was he liked the usage of the word steepled, like if somebody's kind of thinking pensively or whatever, and is like, and he steepled his fingers together thinking about the problem or whatever. And I was like, I have never used steepled, but it paints such a clear picture. And now, like, I've already used it once in my story. I'm like, I have to be careful. I don't want to use it a ton.
I think that's something else too, that when you're a new writer and you put a story together, there's other things to look out for. One is word echoes,
right?
Having the same word, a few sentences apart. You may not notice it when you're writing it, but the reader sure does. Or you use a word like steepled, and if you have a word that's kind of unique like that, and you use it more than twice,
that is so true.
Then a reader's going to pick right up and say, "Oh, he keeps using that word. That's really annoying." That kind of thing.
Yeah, Marcus, I think he used it 4 times in the first book, but I didn't mind it at all. I actually liked it, but it does stick out, like you're saying. Yeah,
it does stick out.
Right on. Well, we've covered some of them. You've got your current kind of 2 jobs going there, moonlighting, and then the day job, and then a past with the Air Force. But even reaching all the way back to whenever your first job, what's the worst job you've ever had?
The worst job I've ever had. Oh boy. Well, there were a couple of assignments in the Air Force that weren't very good, but I would say the worst job I've ever had was probably when I didn't have a job before I started working.
Okay.
If that makes any sense.
I think so. Is it just like the feeling of the drifting, or what do you mean?
I was a lazy kid. My folks didn't push me out to get a job until I was probably about 18 years old, which is kind of ridiculous, but that's the way it was. But I think about that, and once I started working, working gives you a lot of self-worth, I think.
Absolutely.
There's nothing else like coming home from a long day's work and feeling good about what you did. That gives you a lot of self-worth, and there's a certain dignity to that as well that I don't think you can get any other way.
Absolutely. There's a feeling of contributing, being productive.
Right. Yeah, that's how I feel. So my worst job ever would probably be when I wasn't working at all.
But would that have been before you got your first job at 18 or after you'd kind of knew what?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
I'd be before then. Yeah. I've had, I haven't had a whole lot of civilian jobs. I mean, worked in a drugstore and I sold guns for a little while too before I came active duty. That was kind of strange. But most of my jobs. Well, I've been working for the Air Force and doing that kind of stuff continuously since 1988. So it's been a while.
Right. Yeah, it's you're talking about coming home from the day and just feeling good about what you've done. I built houses in Miami for Habitat for Humanity for a year way back in the day.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and it was a great experience. And but I just do probably one of the biggest things that sticks out of my mind from that period was coming home at the end of each day and just being absolutely exhausted and laying on the bed, but feeling so completely satisfied too,
Yep. Yeah. I imagine that's cool. That's a good thing to do too, that Habitat for Humanity, helping other people like that.
Yeah, it was super cool. One of the, in retrospect, statistics we like to share when I chat with folks from that day is the neighborhood that we worked on in South Dade, Miami. We did all of the metal trusses and all interior, well, I guess not interior walls, but exterior walls were also metal framework. And when some of those big hurricanes rolled through there, as they unfortunately too often do, it wiped out everything in that whole area. And the neighborhood that we constructed, of course, had some damage, but every single house was still standing. And we were like,
that's
yes,
awesome. Yes.
That was very cool.
You did a good job.
Yeah, thank you. I wouldn't have anybody trust me to build a house now, but back in the day, I was all right. All right. So I wanted to get into for a minute to your writing process. You've written enough books now. I'm assuming you've kind of got your process sorted, and there's always things to learn. But do you end up more on the side of kind of outlining everything, getting all the beats just right, or just jumping in your seat and running with it?
Well, that's changed for me as well over time. I think with the Gemini effect, when I wrote that one, when it was the Mengele effect, I just sat down and wrote. I had no idea where it was going or where it was going to end. I just sat down and wrote. I had an idea of how it was going to begin, and I went from there.
Right.
But now it's a little different. A lot of writers hate writing a synopsis. Right. That's one of the most terrible things you have to write if you're putting a proposal together for a book. You have to condense everything into just a few pages, right. And it's very dry and very bland. Well, I usually write that to start with, and then it gives me it's not an outline, but it's a basic story that's sitting there in front of me. And then as I write the novel, I just go back and look at the synopsis, and of course it changes. I've never had a story stay on the same go exactly how I thought it was going to go when I started writing it.
Right. But
it gives me an idea to follow. And I've started using Scrivener. I've never used Scrivener before.
Oh, love it.
Oh my God, what a difference.
Big
I got
fan,
Scrivener. Yeah. Once I figured out how to set it up the way I needed it to be set up, and how to it's not called exporting, is it? It's called compiling.
Yeah. How
you get it to compile the way you want it to. Oh my gosh, what a difference. You've got everything on one screen. You don't have to switch back and forth to different files. And, if you've lost them, you don't know where something is. It's all there in one spot, and it makes it a whole lot easier. So I think now my process is basically to write that synopsis to start with. And there's a basic story that I can refer to as I start writing the actual novel.
Yeah, I like I said, love Scrivener and use it in a similar way. I actually end up going so far as I don't do the few page synopsis like you're talking about, but I do I forget what they call it, the organizer or whatever, the little file thing on the left. Every little scene has kind of a beat description all the way down. And it's like you're saying, it always ends up wandering a bit as you go. But generally speaking, I've got a probably, 70% blueprint right out of the gate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes it a whole lot easier. That's for sure. And I just discovered that probably about a year ago. Somebody was going on and on about how great it was, and I thought, well, I'll give it a try. And like I said, once I got it set up the way, working the way I wanted it to, which took me a while. I mean, it took us a while to get my Skype account working, right? So you can, how tech challenged I am. But once I got it set up, it just makes it a joy. Everything's right there at your fingertips, and it makes it so much easier.
Yeah, right on. And for fans and listeners out there who maybe haven't heard of it on the just reading side, Scrivener is a writing software, and versus kind of everybody knows what Word is in Microsoft, where it's just you kind of a page and you go down. Scrivener has a very cool setup where you have that page element, but then there are also other windows that allow you to kind of see the overall structure of your novel as you write it. And it sounds like Chuck does, and I do too. It helps our process immensely.
It sure does. I agree.
Yeah. And speaking of the Skype thing, I don't know if listeners out there, you probably have heard the "Can you hear me now" commercial. Well, Chuck and I totally reenacted that for a good 4 to 5 minutes over a few different calls.
Yes, we did.
And so clearly what we're saying is, Skype, get this fixed. It should be easier. We should just hit a button, not the button, because that doesn't exist, but a button, and the call should work.
Exactly.
Right on. Well, I wanted to also, so you've written, how many novels have you written to this point?
Let's see, 4, and then a couple of novellas, and then about 20 short stories that I have out there.
And do you still, you had mentioned really enjoying the flash fiction short story writing. Do you still do that, or was that like a learning phase for you?
That was like a learning phase. I think all I've got out there now is probably all I'm going to have out there that's in the Scattered Bones. But it was a lot of fun to do it, and like I said, I learned a whole lot. So I've got 4 novels out there right now, and then I've got 2 of them in work. One's another post-apocalyptic story that I've got about 40% done, and then I started reading military science fiction, which I've read a little bit here and there, but I stumbled on a couple of guys, and I read their series. One was Jay Allen is a guy's name, and he writes a series called Blood on the Stars, and he's got another one called Crimson Worlds, and I've started reading that one. Loved them, really good books. And then Marco Cluse, he's a 47 North author like myself, and he's got a military science fiction series called Frontlines. And I read through that, and I thought, you know what? I think maybe I could write something like that too. So I started my own military science fiction novel probably about a month ago, and I'm about 20% done with it right now. But it's a lot of fun. It's enjoyable. I like it. It's a completely different genre than the post-apocalyptic stuff, big word, that I've written before. But it's kind of cool.
Yeah, I have heard of Marco Cluse. Haven't read any yet, but I know a lot of folks love his stories.
He's good stuff. He was a enlisted guy in the West German Army back in the late 80s, I think. And you can really tell his experience as an enlisted guy really colors his writing. A lot of the guys that do really well in that genre have some kind of military background. They can put the realism in the story that other people can't necessarily, because they don't have the background, they don't have the experience.
Right.
Marco does a really good job with that stuff.
And I imagine from you writing it in that genre versus the PA stuff, there is still going to be I imagine that kind of a thread that ties them together is that thriller like pacing, I would guess. Is that right?
Yeah, I used to read a lot of oh my gosh, now I'm not going to be able to remember his name.
James Patterson.
James. Yep, exactly. James Patterson. See, you knew what I was thinking.
He's the go-to if you're talking about thrillers.
Yep, and that's kind of the way I wanted the Gemini effect to go as well. A lot of short chapters, bang, 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 keeps it moving, keeps readers turning pages. So I really like Patterson's books that way because they're always quick, they're always fast. Chapters are short. You don't get tired reading them. One thing I don't like is chapters that are like 30, 40 pages long, because you get halfway through and you're in bed and you're wondering, okay, when can I go to sleep? And you're thinking, oh, I've got 20 more pages left. But I like those short chapters. It also helps the pacing, and it just keeps those pages turning. That's what I try to do too.
Yeah, I do. I agree. I generally like it like that as well. Well, of the 4 novels or so you've written thus far, has one of those stood out above the others as being more challenging?
Being more challenging. Well, I would say the Gemini Effect and the Phoenix Descent are both along the same lines. They're kind of a dystopian, post-apocalyptic thing. The Argus Deceit is completely different. So that was a much different book to write. It's more of a psychological thriller with a science fiction ending, if that makes any sense. It was a very different book to write, but it was fun. There's a lot of stuff that I took from when I was 16 and when I was 10, and I shoved that stuff in the book as well. And there's tons of Easter eggs all over the place in that book as well that come from my life specifically. So that book was a challenge to write, but it was a lot of fun, a little different.
Right. And one of the things I haven't read, like I said, I'm just discovering you as a writer and really enjoying the Gemini Effect. One of the things I've noticed about it, and I'm wondering if it is kind of a theme in your other books, is I think I'm going to try this last name and you can tell me if I'm butchering it or not, but one of your main characters in that book, Carolyn Ridenour, is that how you would, how's the last name?
In my head, I pronounce it Ridenour.
Ridenour. Isn't that hilarious? Like the how the author versus a reader, like, is it coming out the same? You never know for sure.
Right.
Well, I know she's a strong female lead, which I love. I've got 2 daughters. I also enjoy writing strong female leads. Was that something that you really wanted to do on purpose?
Absolutely. Yeah. If I ever have a female character, she is never going to say, "Oh, hold me," or something like that. If I ever write something like that, please drive out here and slap me. Like you, I have 2 daughters, and they're both very strong young women. And I'm not going to write a weak female character. I'm just not. And that's just the way I feel about it. And I think being a dad with 2 daughters, it kind of colors your perspective that way. You think you want your daughter to be just as strong as any of the guys out there and be able to do everything that any of the guys can.
Yeah.
So I will never have a weak female character.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the elements of the Gemini Effect that has brought me in. And I think it's just as a writer, and sounds like you agree, it's part of it, for me at least anyway, is battling kind of the mainstream view. Like you see fashion magazines and if girls look at these and they kind of get a conception of like, this is what I'm supposed to be like. And often the girls are like just frail and skinny and looking like they're half dead, which apparently that's sexy for some reason. And I just look at all that kind of stuff and like girls should only have pink and kind of like, the whole thing just makes me sick, and I probably overreact. But it's like you're saying, I want my daughters to feel empowered in this world.
Exactly. And I think if you weren't a dad with daughters, you may not feel that way. But
probably true.
You have a little girl, and that's it changes. Like I said, it changes your perspective on a lot of things. It does. It did for me, and it sounds like it did for you too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think maybe, I think for the most part, I'm going to say it in case my mom and sisters ever listen to this episode, it was an absolute pleasure growing up surrounded essentially by only females for the most part. But it helped kind of get me in touch with kind of how to relate to the opposite sex. But like you're saying, having daughters, that just brings it to a whole different level.
Yes, it does. It sure does.
We interrupt your regularly scheduled programming for a breaking news alert. Faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. What is it? It's the Rorschach round. Here we go. Welcome to the Rorschach round, where we use ambiguously odd questions to delve deeper into the minds of these amazing authors. Let's get started. before we go, we have something we like to do on the show called the Rorschach round. Are you familiar with it?
No.
Okay, good. So it's even better when it's when it's a surprise.
Uh-oh.
It's basically I ask you a series of ambiguously odd questions so that fans, listeners, and readers out there can just have some fun and get to know you.
Oh boy, there might be some awkward silence, but go ahead.
All right. All I'm saying here is if the awkward silence lasts too long, I may have to play the Jeopardy music.
All right.
Here we go. Question 1. Has anyone ever made you mad in real life that you subsequently killed, maimed, or tortured in a book?
Yes. Did I use their real name? No.
Oh, that's smart. You don't want to get sued, or at least maybe make someone mad, I guess.
Right.
All right. And then maybe the follow-up to that is, does your wife know about that you did this?
Oh, sure.
Okay, good. Yeah, I told as soon as I've actually, and I've admitted this on the show before, I've done it one time thus far. And as soon as I wrote the scene where this particular character comes to a grisly end, I immediately went to my wife and was just like, oh, this was so fun. Look, this is what I just did. And she looked at me like I was a sad person.
Well, you never make a writer mad because you're going to end up dead in one of their books. That's a fact.
Yeah, I think somebody was telling me, who was it? Was it Michael Stephen Fuchs? Somebody I had interviewed said one of their friends actually had a T-shirt printed with that on it, wearing it around. All right, question number 2. What is the number one thing that you haven't done yet that you would still love to do?
Oh, number one thing I haven't done yet that I would still love to do. Oh boy, be an astronaut, but I'm kind of old for that, and I throw up a lot.
Well, maybe if they could somehow fix the throwing up and make it a lot, I guess it would be like an astronaut, but when it's available to the public, maybe.
Right.
And they do have, who was I? Oh, I was talking to Bobby Adair about this. They do have, the Virgin Galactic and SpaceX or somebody.
Right.
It's projected within the next, I think, 2 to 5 years. They kind of always say that, but maybe it's for real this time. But they are actually going to have space tourism up and running as a legitimate business concern, which just sounds to me, and it sounds like maybe you agree, it sounds totally amazing.
Yeah, it does. But boy, those first few people are going to be spending a whole lot of money to do that. That's for sure. Yeah,
I don't currently have the 75,000 I think it requires for that whatever 2-hour trip.
Oh, that sounds pretty cheap. I thought it'd be a lot more than that.
Yeah, I think, well, don't quote me on it, but I think I had read, relatively speaking, because I know there was a Russian oligarch or something way back in the day. Didn't he pay $1 million to go up?
Oh, something ridiculous like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was something. Anyway, so we'll both obviously hope for that and hope that the price becomes reasonable very soon. All right, question 3. If you could know the day and time that you were going to die, would you want to?
Nope.
No. Yeah, me neither. Maybe that's too easy of a question because I think most people are like that. They're just like, no, you would focus on it too much or something. Yeah, you would. I mean, I think you take every day as a blessing because it is. I mean, every day you're alive and kicking is great, and it makes you appreciate it more, I think, as well. Yeah, absolutely. All right, question 4. I think we're on 4. Yep. If you were to have an autobiography, what would it be called? Probably Good Grief. Wait, is this a Charlie Brown reference or just? It might be. I kind of look like Charlie Brown, as a matter of fact, so maybe that's why that came out of my mouth. All right, I bet you're way better at kicking footballs, though, I assume. Not really. All right, last question of the Rorschach round. In your educated opinion, and I say it's educated because you have that history as a missileer and your history in the past there. In your educated opinion, how is the world going to end? Oh. Or maybe it's not. I don't know. That's just the question. How is the world going to end? Well, hopefully it won't end in any of the ways that I've made up. That's for sure. The world won't end. We might, but the Earth will just keep going on and on and on and on. That's a good point. I think we'll. I hope it doesn't happen, but
there's probably a pretty good chance we'll do something incredibly stupid and ruin everything for ourselves. We kind of have that tendency, it seems.
Well, it sounds like, and maybe you could be exploring this in that space opera or space military sci-fi series you're writing, because one option I think Elon Musk and others are trying to push us there is like getting us off this rock, so that if we ever do make that big, kind of not recoverable mistake, we have other options out there.
Right, but and the way humanity goes, we move out to other rocks and then have the same problems there as well.
We're like, once we get to the new place, we're like, oh no, all the same problems, new place.
Exactly. Yep.
Well, that's true. That's the nature, I guess, of us.
Yep.
Right on. Before we go, Chuck, I wanted to find out, do you have, and you'd kind of mentioned two there, but do you have any other books that we should be looking forward to? And if so, can you give us the highlight view?
Well, what I've got out recently, the one I have out most recently is The Widening Gyre, which is that first book that I wrote so many years ago that's been completely transformed. That one is self-published actually through my agency's got a service called their Trident Media Group Digital Media and Publishing. And they will take a story for their clients, and they will you find a cover designer and a copy editor and whatnot, and they'll put it out on Kindle. So that book's out there right now. That's my most recent one. And as far as the other two go, the post-apocalyptic one and the military science fiction one, those are in work right now, and I really don't know when those are going to come out. But I do have one book right now called The Phoenix Descent, which is, out of all of them I've written, that one's probably my favorite. And it's on Amazon Kindle right now at a reduced price for the month of February.
Oh, awesome.
And and it's selling pretty good here the first 3 days of the month. There's been quite a few. But that story is one of my favorites, and a lot of the guys that around the office that I've let read it, it's their favorite too. I think it's a pretty good book.
What's can you give us the kind of the overview, the synopsis of that book?
Well, it's about this crew of 3 people. Again, there's a strong female lead on the crew. Her name is Caitlin Wagner, call sign Sif. She's a Navy naval aviator, lieutenant commander who's an astronaut. There's an Air Force guy, and I'm bad with names, and I'm just as bad with names when it comes to my characters. I can't remember them half the time. There's an Air Force guy, and then there's a scientist named Lucas Hoover. These 3 people launch on the first mission to Mars, and then something goes wrong while they're in stasis, and they wake up from stasis, realize something's terribly wrong. The ship had the AI, artificial intelligence on the ship, had a default program that if something went wrong, it would get them back to Earth. So they're heading back to Earth, trying to figure out what happened. And when they get there, let's just say that Earth is completely different than it was when they left, and it's not even the same time period.
Okay, that sounds cool.
Yeah, so it's if you like Planet of the Apes, you might kind of like this one too.
Yeah, that sounds great. So I'll be sure to check that out, and we'll get that in the show notes as well. And this episode will air on February 13th. So fortunately, it sounds like we'll be within that window of the reduced price.
Yeah. Okay, that's good.
Cool. And then Chuck, thanks for that. And if people want to find out more about you and what you do, where should they go?
My website, it's chuckgrossart.com, and there's links to all my books there. And you can read a little bit about me. I think you visited the website, you saw the goofy pictures and whatnot. All that's there. Or you can go to Amazon and just search for me and go to my Amazon.com author page, and there's all my books there as well. So if they're interested, take a look.
Right on. We'll get that in the show notes as well. And going back, and I recommend to listeners out there in listening land, go to Chuck's website and check out the books, of course, as well, but then those photos as well. It's just a fun little timeline. And one also that jumped out to me in particular, and I wanted to get your opinion on, was it's toward the end of the timeline, so more recent than the others, and you're sitting in front of a glowing monitor, and I think your hand is over your mouth, and the monitor's reflecting off your glasses. And my feeling from it was you were looking at some story and just thinking like, oh no, this is totally FUBAR. Is that accurate or no?
That's my normal look until while I'm writing. It's like, oh my God, I'm never going to get this done. That kind of thing. That's funny.
All right. So, people go check it out, and we'll make sure everything's in the show notes there. Chuck, I just wanted to say again, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thanks for having me, Will. I really appreciate
it. We just want to thank you so much for joining us today, ladies and gentlemen. We had a wonderful discussion with Chuck and want to extend our deepest gratitudes for his participation. All right. Yes, that was my pseudo or terrible impersonation of the old-timey news anchor voices. So I don't know if it came off as well as I hoped it did, but that will be for you to decide and try to forget immediately, I assume. Anyway, I just want to say thanks again for joining us. Chuck, thank you so much. That was a lot of fun. And if you guys want to find out, guys and girls, if you want to find out more about the books and links mentioned, those are all in the show notes at www.williamoday.com/17, the number of the episode. That's it for today. If you would like to be sure to never miss a show and always have them immediately available on your device of choice, you can subscribe by going to www.williamoday.com/iTunes. And if you enjoyed the show, I would so appreciate a rating and review on iTunes. They both help with store visibility, and they also let other listeners know if this show is something that they might be interested in checking out. And I've made it easy to access both of those by going to the same link on my website, www.williamoday.com/iTunes. That will have a link there that you can jump over to either subscribe and or maybe all three, rate and review the show. So I would so appreciate that. Thank you so much. That's it for now. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to the OMG Book Show. You can find out more at www.williamoday.com.